At-risk youth are generally teenagers or young adults in their early 20s. If you're a parent and your child and or young adult have not yet got themselves in trouble with the justice system, but you're very concerned about the path they're going down, and you'd be surprised, folks, how often these children or young adults have actually been in the private school system. If you're a parent of one of those children and you feel like there's nowhere to go for help because they sort of fall between the gaps of what the system has to offer, then you want to tune into my next guest, Lyndon Jones, founder of NextGen Edge. And Lyndon specifically addresses this issue of working with at-risk youth who are not yet in trouble with the system. He helps make sure, to the best of his ability, that they don't end up in the youth justice system or the adult justice system. If you'd like to learn more, stay tuned. Let's go.
Hi folks, welcome to the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast by Gary Ryan from Organisations That Matter. In this podcast, Gary shares everything about servant leadership, service leadership, authentic leadership, how to create high performance cultures, service excellence and life balance. Here's your host, Gary Ryan.
Hi, Lyndon. Thanks for joining us on the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast. Welcome.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
It certainly is. And just to help the folk that don't really know too much about NextGen Edge, just a quick overview of what you do with your work.
So NextGen Edge stems from a background in sort of youth work and working with young people, but it's grounded in my background in criminology and criminal justice, as well as some lived experience of me being a young fella once upon a time, not so much anymore, but and even for a while there, I lived in housing commission and that kind of thing. So I wasn't super privileged. I had a great life and great parents, and so it's founded on the backbone of if you have good boundaries, good parenting, good mentorship, and the right people around you, it doesn't matter what your background is, you can achieve. But it's also more importantly about those families out there who maybe aren't on the radar because maybe they're higher earners or higher achievers, and so they don't flag because they're not accessing government or social based programs that are funded for, I guess, lower socioeconomic or disadvantaged people. And so, it's really about filling that gap as well and making sure that there is a space out there for, people who, maybe have the wherewithal, but still don't have the skills or the knowledge or know where to go because, it's not something that's, I guess, heavily publicized.
Yeah, and it's surprising how, as you've just mentioned, people might often be in a reasonably well socio-economic background, but their youth, their teenagers, their young adults may in fact be slipping through the gaps a bit with what the system has available for them for understandable reasons, because we've got to fund the ones obviously that don't necessarily have the money. But how would you specifically say you're helping to address that gap? So, for example, let's say if I had a child that was, exhibiting some behaviors, and it might actually be worth even sharing what some of those behaviors might look like, Lyndon, if they would be exhibiting some of those behaviors, and really as a parent, I'm trying everything I can as a parent. The school's trying, but I can see where this is going and I don't like where it's going. What do I do?
Yeah, great question. And it's probably easier to maybe share some of the coaching that I've done. So, for example, in that situation, I work with a family at the moment. Young person is they're more disengaged from school. They've certainly improved since obviously they've started working with me, not to pump up my tires, but they've put a lot of hard work in themselves as well. But what was happening is this young person, like any young person, any teenager, they start to obviously drift away from parents and seek validation from peers. But unfortunately, they had sort of met some peers that were, maybe a part of a subculture that was not, um, I guess, leading them in the right direction, was doing the wrong things. And so, you hear about that, getting in with the wrong crowd sort of thing. But because I guess there's a lot of risk taking involved with that, it's, to kind of talk neuroscientifically, there's potentially some dopamine stuff happening there. So it's exciting. And so that's the draw, right? Is that they're doing things, they're taking risks. And so it's exciting. So they're drawn to that group of people. And so a lot of the work that we had to do was try to find other ways to, I guess, fill that need that they were getting, which was, that need for exploration and that need for maybe a little bit of risk and excitement, but do it in really healthy ways, to get them away from those people. Obviously I'd love to be able to help those other kids as well, but they're not the ones reaching out to me, right? So and so a lot of the work came from, I was actually doing more of the work with the parents, the mums than the dads, because, coaching, people might have seen the interview I did with Coach Damian Brown recently, and him and I talked in that about the impact that we can have as coaches, whether it be in martial arts or in a business like mine, is very limited without parent buy-in. Because we might only have the young person for a couple of hours. We might be doing some mentorship and community engagement based stuff for a few hours, but once they go home, if there's no structure in place and there's no respect in the home, and even when mums and dads are trying desperately, if that's not happening at home, then the impact that we can have is limited. So that's why I also do a lot of work with parents as well, is to almost be a sounding board for them. And I lean on my experience in, working with young people who've been in the youth justice system, my experience in case managing youth and in residential care, and just, I guess, looking at maybe the strategies that they're using and making little tweaks here and there. So it's really just about coaching them through, in this situation, when I've seen this type of behavior, if we do this, this is often the outcome. If that doesn't work, then there's lots of other, like, you've got to know, this is strategy A. If that doesn't work, well, we've got B and C as well, because every young person's different. Not every strategy is going to work. But behaviors that you might see, it could just be, I think the big one that I often see is, and I don't want to call youth dishonest, because that's, I'm not about painting young people with labels, but, they might be saying, oh, I'm going to school, and they get dropped off at the gate. And then as soon as mum and dad leave, they're going elsewhere, and I'm not talking about wagging, like just not turning up to your favorite, class that you don't like, but they are going probably to these, these other environments where there's often adults that are, sometimes grooming them or whatever. And there's always a structure to it. So, you'll start to see things like that. If there's no sort of respect in the house, in terms of just understanding that in the house, there is still a hierarchy, like parents are there to parent. And, even in my relationship with my kids, like I call my daughter my little mate, because she is my mate, but at the same time, I'm still her dad, right?
Yeah.
And it's still my responsibility to keep her safe and parent her. And sometimes I have to do things that she doesn't like me for. And I think it's about controlling those moments, like allowing kids to express themselves and advocate, and that's all part of life, right? There's skills that you have to learn to advocate for yourself. If you don't like something, it's okay to voice that. Doesn't mean it won't change, because maybe that's in place for a reason, to keep you safe. Same reason we have social laws and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's often the types of behaviors that you'll see is just, it's often really subtle little things that you don't see. Maybe they start to withdraw, spend a lot more time in their room on social media. They might be less likely to engage in a family meal at the dinner table. They will be less engaged with you as the parent. And I don't mean, like, there's always that healthy sense of, when I was a young lad, my mum and I, we joke about it now. I didn't really speak in words. I just grunted. Um, ooh, food, that sort of thing. Ooh, tired. And we sort of laugh about that, but that was kind of the healthy teenage boy thing, right? But as long as I was doing that, mum knew I was okay. It was when I wouldn't do anything or I wouldn't come out of my room, mum usually knew that, hey, something's not right. So I suppose, part of my coaching as well is just being able to help parents to maybe identify from an outside perspective, what they might be seeing or experiencing and how to adjust. Because I think that, and certainly it's true now, as a parent myself, that I don't notice everything with my kids because I'm really close to the situation. And with your own kids, there's a far greater emotional attachment. So I think it's really important. I've said this before in a number of other interviews about, it takes a village to raise a child, and I genuinely believe that. And part of the village is sometimes people who aren't emotionally connected in the same way that you are, and they're providing more of a guidance space and a safety net so that they can't get too far outside the boundaries.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you offer with your services, Lyndon, is the fact that you can work with the young person and also work with the parents, and that wouldn't. In most cases, that's not going to be in the same time frame. So, while part of the time that may be occurring, but generally speaking, once you've set your boundaries and set the clarification around how everything's going to work, you'd be spending some time with the young person independently and then the parents
Absolutely.
independently as well. And equally not, I think this is important for people to understand is that you don't then become the communication between the two groups. You actually educate them so that they can communicate between themselves and you give them the tools
Yes,
to do that. And again, one of the
exactly.
challenges that you've shared with me over time is that sometimes the parents, particularly if they come from a pretty strong socioeconomic background, they feel like, is there something wrong with me because I should already know this stuff?
Mm.
Well, where
Yeah.
on earth are you learning how to parent? I mean,
There's no
like,
rule book on it, Gary.
yeah, exactly, and we're not really taught. I mean, you're sort of swinging the bat based off of whatever you learned from your own parents, but that was just really one perspective for most people, and that may or may not have been the greatest example for a lot of folk, right? No matter
Mm.
what the socioeconomic background was. And so the willingness to reach out and ask for help's the first step, but your, you know,
Oh,
your
definitely.
capability to address both is awesome. Just on that too, I think it's important for people to give you an opportunity. Just talk a little bit about your academic background that combined with your own lived experiences brought you to the place of creating Next Gen Edge.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, I have some study experience, I suppose, in criminology and criminal justice. Always took a very keen interest in kind of, uh, I guess, crime as a social phenomenon. Not committing it, Gary, of course, but just I've just always found it fascinating, and I think it stems from a bit of a case study. I mentioned before, kind of growing up for a little while there in housing commission, and I think of a friend of mine that we grew up playing cricket together. Right now, we both had very similar situations. Where our parents had split, and we were living basically a few doors down from each other, same environment, same society, same sort of setup. But I don't know where he is now. Obviously, I'm not really associated with him anymore. But he went one way. Unfortunately, um, went down a path of addiction and a number of other things. And I only wish him the best. But I didn't. And it wasn't from a lack of access or opportunity, Gary. I'll tell you that. There was just something in me that it wasn't something, it wasn't a thing for me, right? And so I started thinking to myself, well, we're two blokes, we're good mates, very similar, sort of like almost identical in terms of like the things that we were surrounded by. We both grew up playing cricket, all that sort of stuff. But why did we turn out so different? And
Hmm.
so that fascinated me. Um, that coupled with the fact that I tried just about any job you could think of. I've done a few of these interviews now, and I bring it up a lot. Anything you could think of as a job, I probably tried it, and sometimes even twice, just because that was kind of uh, something that I just believed I had to do. I wasn't uh, a great student in the sense that I didn't like listening to other people. Um, but I was very intelligent. So like all my teachers would say the same thing. Lyndon's highly intelligent, could achieve anything if he applied himself. But I just didn't know what I wanted to do. Right? I didn't know where life was going to take me. So I was like, well, I'm still going to turn up to school and I'm going to graduate grade 12, but I don't really have a plan, and I'm just going to try lots of different things and see what I like, see what I don't like, maybe fail a bit along the way, make some mistakes, and learn and live. And so that's what I did. And so part of NextGen Edge's philosophy is around that. Just allowing young people to kind of safely make mistakes and explore. Part of it from the academic background comes from that curiosity of like, why do, how does that happen? That two people, can have all of the same, um, positives and negatives in their life, protective factors and risk factors, and end up so different. And so, whilst I was doing all of these jobs, I was never happy, really. I never really, cared for any of them. But I bumped into an old colleague, and he was studying criminology at the time. And I said, oh, that's a thing? Like, that's amazing. And so literally I finished talking to him and I jumped on the phone and I looked up to see if it was possible for me to study. And I was 27 at the time. Turns out it was. And so I thought, great, I'm going to go to university. I'm going to answer this question once and for all. Well, Gary, I left university with a lot more knowledge, a lot more passion, some direction, and understanding that youth and helping the next generation and using what I think is a fairly likable guy to help the next me. What I didn't get was the answer to my question, which was why how can two people that have the same situation end up completely different? I ended up with a lot more questions, which I'm still seeking to answer. I'm not actively studying from like a university perspective, but I keep up with all the latest research because I still love it. I still am very passionate and want to make sure that I'm understanding, all of the new breakthroughs in criminological research so that I can make sure that NextGen Edge is best positioned to help the next generation. So that's kind of part two, right? Is the academic side. Part one is the lots of different jobs and wanting to explore. And part three was during my study, I was tailoring a lot of my courses towards young people, and I started to realize, oh, this is something I'm really drawn to. And then I was given an opportunity to do an internship with Project Booyah, which is a program that's run up here in Queensland. It's a police joint initiative with the PCYC. And they have two programs. They have the Respect program, which is for the more really high-risk kids who are already engaged in youth justice. And the turnarounds I saw in some of those kids, they went from, the standard, Grand Theft Auto and that sort of thing to back at school and studying and absolutely thriving. And then there was the Project Booyah, which was more the early intervention stuff. And I got the opportunity to work in both of those programs. And those programs had a profound impact and confirmed to me that working with youth was where I wanted to be. So NextGen Edge, eventually, it was always a thing that was in my brain for about 5 years until I reached out to you, actually, and you helped me kind of, I guess, you gave me a kick up the bum and told me basically to stop thinking about it and just do it. And so NextGen Edge was created, and those are the three founding principles, I think, that ground my philosophy.
Yeah. And look, one of a number of kicks up the bum. We'll just have that on the record, folks.
Yeah,
But he was a
several.
willing metaphorical recipient, shall we say?
Yes.
And the beauty is people are now benefiting from your services.
Yes.
That's the most,
Yeah.
and families are better benefiting, and young people are benefiting, and which is awesome. And look, the other thing, folks, is Lyndon's a parent himself, and he's experienced his own trauma as a parent, and he's not just coming from a theoretical background about what it means to raise people. He's had, many would argue the most difficult of experiences as a parent. And Lyndon, yeah, you feel free to lean into that momentarily if you like. But I
Yeah.
think it's important that people understand the man and the father and the husband and the family man that's driving Next Gen Edge, and how, you're not just coming from this theoretical place. You're actually coming from a place of lived experience, while different, is still within the realm of what drives you to do what you do. And if you're happy to lean into a bit of that just momentarily, that'd be great, Lyndon.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary. I actually really appreciate you bringing that up. It's always been, I guess, part of mine and my wife's healing, is talking about our experience. And I don't talk about it too publicly because probably more to protect others. It's not that I'm afraid to talk about it or whatever, but it's very difficult. So what Gary's talking about is now I'll get to last year, Gary, which you're familiar with,
Mm.
but I'll start 13 years ago. I was 24, 23. My wife was 21. She was 40 weeks pregnant. So for those listening at home, that's full term. And the day that she was due, we went to the hospital thinking that, baby was coming. And unfortunately, when we arrived, there was no heartbeat. And tragically, our little girl, our first little girl, was stillborn. What I found through that experience was that the overwhelming sense of community that not only myself and my family had built, because when we held the funeral, the number of people that were there was overwhelming. So I knew, as difficult as that situation was, I was clearly a good person. There was a lot of people there that were there to support me, and my wife, most importantly. Then, yeah, obviously we have had children since then, and we've been blessed and lucky enough to have children. But sadly, last year we had twin boys. One of them who was with us, little Archer, and he's thriving. But his twin brother was born. He was very sick, and sadly he passed away. So we have actually lost two children. It was incredibly difficult. I think definitely the first one, not that it's ever easier. I'm not suggesting that. And I just want to say, if there's any other parents out there who have experienced this, please reach out. It's, and not even from a business perspective, just from a human level. I'm happy to share my experience and talk about it. For me, it's part of my healing. It is talking about it and honoring my kids' memories. But yeah, little Leo, he's very sick. And unfortunately, 5 days after he was born, we made the heartbreaking decision that it was time to let him go. He'd fought as hard as he could. And again, we had an overwhelming sense of community around us, which was great. We opted this time around not to hold a funeral. We wanted to keep it. It was more for my wife and I and our kids, and we kept it very, very kind of close quarters. But I think what those things taught me was, first of all, how incredible my wife is, how incredible our relationship is. I think losing one child could have definitely ended people's marriages, or, we weren't married at the time. But losing two would almost certainly potentially do that. And I wouldn't blame that at all. But for us, it actually galvanized us. It brought us closer together. But it also showed us that we have an incredibly high AQ, adversity quotient. We have this ability to work through adversity and be resilient. Of course, ideally, we shouldn't have to be resilient, but that's just the way that it is. And so, in addition to my experience as a young fella, my experience academically, but also my experience as a parent. I've ridden the absolute highs and the absolute lows of parenthood. So I come from, when I'm working with parents, I come from that genuine desire, privilege, honor of helping young people with their most valuable and precious asset, which is their kids and our future as a country.
Yeah. And thank you so much for being brave once again and sharing
Thank you,
that
mate. No problem.
story. And I know that you're helping people every time you share your story, and your incredible wife, Tennille. Just every time I hear you speak about it, I just get more and more respect for both of you. And so, folks, the important part of Lyndon sharing that is to again understand the man behind the business that would be serving you and your child and your family. It could be a young adult too, of course, as a young person. And it's important to understand that where Lyndon's coming from. And when you go through the experience that Lyndon's had, the when you've had some children who've not had the opportunity to live a full life, and there you are as a parent, and your child does have the opportunity, but you can see they're going down a path that's not healthy for them or you, then everything and anything you can do to help that child to actually get back on the path that they were actually born to do. So I don't believe anybody was born to go down the path of actually destruction and living outside of the social parameters of the society that we've created. I don't think, I can understand why people do, and Lyndon certainly does from many
Yep.
avenues. Understand how that happens and why people end up there. And you spoke about yourself and your friend a few apartments down the
Yep.
doors down the hallway there. That and again, still trying to understand that. But so we know it happens. But the point is
Definitely.
to have someone that is so passionate to help the young person and the parents navigate that. So as and really in this space, at the moment, where it's before they end up in youth justice or adult justice system, and that's such an important place to be, because we also live now in a society where, while it's great that, as Lyndon shared earlier, there are opportunities for people to get themselves out of the justice system and on a great path, and you shared some examples with that before. At the same time, because of the digital record, that is actually something that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. And so, if we can prevent that from happening, if there's a way to stop that from happening, it's worth exploring, folks. And so, Lyndon, what would be some of the best ways for people to actually reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, well, obviously we've got our website. There's some free resources you can sign up for there. Just a quick little form there. So there's a life skills checklist, and there's also a sort of a parenting guide for raising teens, particularly in the modern landscape. And then there's another one, which is just our find your edge form, and you can reach out to us those ways. You can obviously call us. All of that is also on the website. Email us. We're on all your socials: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. You'll see my ugly mug talking to you. On LinkedIn as well. So we're everywhere. Anywhere you can find us. Our number is available. Our email's there. I want to talk to you. I want to tell you my story. I want to hear yours. And I want to make sure that together, the future and the most important assets that we have, which is our young people, have the best opportunity to be the best versions of themselves.
So that's nextgenedge.com.au, folks. So nextgenedge.com.au. You'll also find Lyndon Jones. So if you look up for Lyndon Jones, you're going to find him on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and certainly NextGen Edge. You'll also find the company on those platforms as well. We always finish our interview with the same question.
Okay. What's the question, Gary?
That question is, what does moving beyond being good mean to you, Lyndon?
Oh, um, you know what? Bear with me here, Gary, because it's going to sound a bit weird to begin with, but you'll understand where I'm coming from. So, moving beyond being good for Next Gen Edge is kind of like uh, what Band Aid and Panadol and Nurofen are. And I don't mean the pharmaceuticals. What I mean is that when people say Band Aid, they think of that strip that you put on cuts, right? But that's actually a brand name. It's not the product itself. Panadol's the same, right? Panadol is the, I'm assuming you have international viewers. So for people who live overseas, it's like paracetamol. And Panadol is like a pretty famous brand in Australia. And so when people say, unless you're in a hospital, they might say, would you like some paracetamol? But typically in our house, we'll say, would you like some Panadol? You're not talking about the little tablet that makes your headache go away. You're talking about the brand, right? And Nurofen is very similar. That's ibuprofen. So in Australia, Nurofen's kind of the main brand. So I want NextGen Edge when they're thinking about youth coaching, or when they're thinking about early intervention, when they're thinking about parents. I want NextGen Edge to be synonymous with the act of those things, or the product itself. So regardless of whether it's within NextGen Edge, or if there are other services out there, which I know there are, and there's some great ones out there, that NextGen Edge is actually synonymous with those things, rather than, so they become coaching, they become parenting support, they become community engagement and development, rather than the alternatives. So they actually become synonymous with the act, rather than the actual product itself.
Oh, I love that. Such a unique take on the question. I love it. I
So
love it.
I hope I've articulated that well. I think the Australians will certainly understand what I'm talking about, especially with the Band-Aid thing. If you cut your foot, people go, would you like a Band-Aid? Again, they're not talking about the actual strip that you put.
Yeah.
That's not what that is. That's the brand.
Yes, absolutely. And so what I'm hearing you say is, moving beyond being good for you is that, if someone was having some challenges with their youth, someone might say, you need some NextGen Edge, mate.
100%. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Gary. Yeah.
And they would actually understand what that meant. Of course I do.
100%. Yeah.
That's what I need to go and get me some.
Yeah. So that's what moving beyond being good means for NextGen Edge, and for me.
That's
fantastic. That we
fantastic.
become the Band-Aid or the Panadol of youth coaching and community development and parenting support.
Oh, that is fantastic. Love it. It's a great answer. It's fantastic. I love when I hear answers like that. So, folks, Lyndon, I really want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming along
Thank
to
you,
the
Gary. Appreciate it.
Beyond Being Good podcast today. You're welcome. So, folks, it's really important that you like and subscribe. So click both buttons. Click the thumbs up and click the subscribe button so you don't miss a future episode of the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast. Now, folks, because if you don't subscribe and you don't follow us, you're going to miss out on great people like Lyndon Jones that we absolutely have the pleasure to speak with on the podcast. So once again, I'm Gary Ryan, your host of the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Bye.